But our main speaker today is Luke Bradley, who is the head of the IT4IT platform engineering at Vodafone Group Services. Luke has been leading architecture and platform engineering teams in the Vodafone Group for the last 8 years, having worked in technology for more than 20 years. He is accountable for a multitude of group-wide transformation projects spanning topics such as ITSM, observability, CI/CD, analytics, portfolio planning, identity and access management, and more. And today Luke's going to talk to us about how the Vodafone Group is using the IT4IT standard as a blueprint for their new digital operating model, supporting their digital transformation journey. So a warm welcome to Toolkit Tuesday, please, for Luke Bradley. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Steve, for the introduction. I think your colleague has handed me over the ball, so that's great. So hello, everybody. Thank you for joining. I'll jump rather quickly into things. What I'll be talking to you today is around how Vodafone are using IT4IT to enable DevSecOps at scale. Bear with me here, just fighting with my cursor. So a big part, I think everybody has a pretty good view on who Vodafone is. Vodafone is one of the largest global telecom providers. I think it's maybe the 4th or 5th largest telco in the world. And you know, we're globally distributed across a variety of geographies. As part of our Tech 2025 strategy, we're doing a vast amount of work to both insource what has been contracts that have been outsourced over the last 20 years. But as part of that insourcing, we have a huge aspiration to enable a lot of platform development within the organization. And with that, and again, if you type in Vodafone, you'll see a lot of media coverage everywhere. With that, we have an aspiration to onboard in excess of 7,000 developers in the coming few years, and to also get to a position where close to 50% of our technology staff base, which is in excess of 35,000 globally, that whereby 50% or at least 50% of those come from a software engineering background. I work within digital IT within Vodafone Group Services or within Vodafone Technology, and we see ourselves as a huge part in how Vodafone will achieve that ambition. Bear with me here, let's change slide. So to touch on to provide a bit more context on the organization that I come from, and maybe to give a bit more context on the problem. So I work within an internal service provider within Vodafone Group called Technology Voice, where we are an enormous organization that has grown rapidly over the last few years. In the last maybe 7 years, we've grown from close to 1,500 people when I joined to being in excess of 15,000 people now. And what we aim to do is to support Vodafone in achieving its Tech 2025 vision through a multitude of levers. So around helping, one of the big focuses that we have is differentiating ourselves through software engineering, really facilitating and accelerating our insourcing ambitions, whereby we maintain a sustainable knowledge and long-term knowledge base within Vodafone, where we modernize delivery. So that's in adopting more and more modern practices, whether it's DevSecOps, whether it's scaled agile, and in particular site reliability engineering from a culture and mindset perspective. And then at the same time that we really look to leverage our scale. Being an organization of 15,000 people, there's a vast amount of talent and skill in the organization, and what we really want to do is to make that available to Vodafone on demand as required in an agile manner. Fighting our cursor. To introduce myself a bit further and to introduce the organization that I sit within. So I work or I head up a function called IT4IT Platform Engineering. We have over the last 3 or 4 years really tried to embrace the basic principles of what IT4IT targets. And what we've recently done is we branded ourselves around IT4IT Platform Engineering, whereby we've taken global accountability both within our Technology Voice function that I'm specifically reside within, but also in the context of our broader digital and IT function. And our overarching ambition is as the title of the presentation is effectively to enable DevSecOps at scale. You guys will obviously be familiar with Rob Akashok. Rob would regularly and quite facetiously infer that DevSecOps in some organizations, depending on how things progress, are at risk and can become the next silo in a modern organization. And what we're really trying to head off is making sure that we can avoid that type of risk. To give you a bit of flavor in terms of a scale, so as I mentioned, Vodafone, in our technology organization, we have in excess of 35,000 people. Tech Voice is in the region of 15,000 people. And in terms of our platforms, well, I talked today, or I'm on the slide, we talk about supporting 46 platforms. The way I try to look at it, and the sort of social contract, if you will, that I have with our stakeholders, is that we try to unburden them with managing some of the platforms that will enable scale development. So instead of individual teams having to worry about monitoring services or monitoring capabilities, whether it's logging, cloud monitoring, etc., instead of having to build their own automation tools, what we try to work with them is to take that burden off them, bring them through the life cycle, financial security approval processes, get the platforms up and running at scale, and establish them in more of a collaborative and democratized operating model, so that the people using our platforms, but in particular our engineers, that they can instead focus on creating value as opposed to messing around, to be honest, with what is ultimately duplicated and silo work. So in terms of why do we exist, so I mean, I'm pretty sure everybody would have seen this slide before. So I think everybody's aware that the overall operating model in IT and the types of challenges that an organization needs to cater for is evolving rapidly, right? I mean, Vodafone is an enormous company. There are external trends in technology. There is an ever-evolving set of working practices. I think they're both forcing us, but also facilitating a change. And I'll be honest, so much change is happening quite frequently, with essentially major paradigm shifts happening on a regular basis. And we have collectively concluded that we must evolve, we must respond to this, we must be at the forefront of this in order to attract and retain talent, but also as a business in order to properly leverage sort of the variety of emerging opportunities. And look, to be honest, it isn't easy. It isn't hard. If you look at this visualization, I'm particularly fond of this visualization. And it really does a good job at talking about how and highlighting how difficult it is to evolve an operating model. When this is the reality of the landscape. I've given maybe an indication of the scale of the platforms that we run. Maybe, I think we're including public cloud, we're in the region of about 75,000 infrastructure elements under management. We have about 120,000 end user computer elements under management, and about 6,000 IT services. When you combine siloed working practices with that level number of services in a federated global operating model, overlaid with a tooling ecosystem or a capability ecosystem like that, the level of complexity is exponentially larger than what's accentuated here. And we encountered it, and I suspect everybody encounters it. It's extremely difficult for a senior leader to identify a really effective path out of this spaghetti, this complexity in modernizing the sort of the digital management landscape in that brownfield environment. There are countless legacy constraints and challenges existing in large enterprises that enable us that aspirational target of achieving flow. And when you combine it with this view, and obviously I think anybody who's familiar with Rob's presentations will be aware of this as well, or will have seen this. The vendor landscape is absolutely large. There are an abundance of suppliers in the market, and there are increasingly ever starting to horizontally expand into other areas. As an architect or as an enterprise architecture background, I'm often find myself lamenting or wishing that they would sort of stay in their lane a bit more as they bleed laterally. And I think, you know, to really accentuate the problem, the emerging field of generative AI, you know, it's probably the perfect example of the types of challenges that senior leaders of digital and IT face. You know, there's no question as to whether those capabilities and those emerging technologies, there's no question as to whether they will add value. But I think that the question is, how do you actually really benefit from the potential? How do you really benefit from the use cases, the productivity gains? But how do you do so in a scaled and sustainable way that addresses cost, privacy, security, intellectual property when it comes to generative AI? You know, how do you really leverage that as opposed to just layering on another set of silos, another layer of complexity? And I think those silos, you know, the silos can be very enticing sometimes, but in the reality is they enable agility in the short term while ultimately strangling the agility of the organization in the long haul. And you know, that again, that aspirational target of flow, that aspirational target of transparency and traceability across the stack, that becomes obviously more and more difficult with every layer of complexity. You know, and tying some of those challenges back into Vodafone, right? And in terms of, you know, what does digital IT and Vodafone need to respond to? And you know, the reality, the telecoms industry is evolving. You know, just like fintech, just like in various other industries, there are risks of disruption all over the place. You know, in reality, Vodafone needs to give our customers what they want, and they need to give it faster and sooner. You know, we need to position ourselves for sustainable but maximizing our growth opportunities, and we need to really simplify and remove the complexity that acts as barriers to engaging and you know, purchasing and using our services. And in digital IT, I think we see ourselves, and more in the telco industry, and digital and IT are seen as being uniquely positioned as a way to differentiate ourselves among our customers and to really deliver the outcomes and the experience that our customers want. Vodafone, we see ourselves as a premium service provider where customer experience, where ease of use is a major part of what we want to do, you know, and it's how we want our brand to be seen. And digital IT enables so much of that. You know, so it's absolutely critical that we respond. Let's change my slide here. So to build on those types of challenges and what's happening in the industry and what Vodafone really specifically need to respond to, and why did we go down the direction of IT4IT? John, I'm going to keep this quite simple, quite practical. We can get quite aspirational or quite abstract in some of this stuff, but at its heart, so much of what I've talked about, so much of what the industry needs to solve, so much of what we want to achieve in Vodafone, it is about enabling productivity in a sustainable way and a scalable way across the organization. And what IT4IT is really helping us is to tell a story and establish a brand for what will be a reasonably long tail of a transformation program. You know, while at a headline perspective, we are achieving major things, but when you have a long tail of 6,500 services, 75,000 endpoints, you know, it isn't going to be a big bang overnight thing. Things are going to take a while. Vodafone are a TOGAF organization. We have embraced TOGAF from an enterprise architecture practices perspective for a long time. We are going through an enormous safe transformation where we're really trying to align the organization around value streams and take some of the complexity out of the organization, but also be a lot more intentional and a lot more controlled around how we drive investment. And obviously, historically, we've embraced and leveraged ITIL. Vodafone globally offer a variety of services. We offer business critical services, emergency services, and whether it's ITIL or adjacent frameworks, you know, it's absolutely critical. And we really live the standard and live the mindset of which ITIL drives. And I think that's it's the ever emerging new frameworks and new trends in this sort of process ecosystem is where IT4IT has really helped us. And how we've been using IT4IT is to tell a story of an umbrella framework that ensures that people are thinking about how these practices work together, that upfront, very early in the life cycle of a program, very early in the life cycle of a product or of an initiative, that we're thinking about how to do this. As well, most importantly, Vodafone as a telco, obviously we're heavily engaged with TM Forum. Vodafone are one of the founding members of ODA, or the Open Digital Architecture, which is the broader OSS, BSS, and digital architecture framework that we've adopted in Vodafone. What we've done is we've embedded IT4IT into ODA. We've branded it as Voda or VODA, and it's allowing us to tell a very consistent story around our overarching direction of travel. At the same time, obviously I mentioned that we've incorporated IT4IT into Voda. Voda or ODA or Voda together is the overarching reference architecture of Vodafone. What we use IT4IT is to describe an architecture vision, or to act as a reference architecture for what an integrated DevSecOps tool chain, starting from enterprise architecture, portfolio planning, all the way through to the services that are in production, enabling that transparency, enabling that traceability, enabling a common set of reference data, et cetera, et cetera. Again, I quite like this slide, or quite like this view. Being a child of the 80s, I sort of see it as a game of Tetris, to be honest, where we're trying to connect things and where we're trying to create that full stack. Building on that reference architecture point, obviously here is a relatively standard view of V3 of IT4IT. We in Vodafone are still using version 2. I want to be very open with that. Some of the terminology you'll see in the subsequent slides. Obviously, version 3 has recently been released. We are doing a vast amount of work at the moment in terms of building a development pipeline for our people, so that we can start to embrace it at scale. Jumping on to the next stage around how we've used IT4IT, or where IT4IT has really influenced us on the ground. IT4IT, building on what I spoke about with Voda and ODA, the top half of this diagram is a representation of how we're organized from a customer and partner segment, organized around hero user journeys, and then also the business value streams that we've been defining in collaboration with TM Forum. Through the heart of that is our transformation and using ODA as a reference architecture, whereby we've established a global portfolio organization acting as a LACE to help bring, and start looking at, vertically integrated value stream design, spanning sort of operational value streams, development value streams, and then underlying platform value streams. And I think so. One of my colleagues created this view showing how IT4IT and the full ecosystem of what IT4IT advocates, underpinning what we want to achieve at scale in Vodafone and digital IT. It's probably been one of our crowning achievements, but I think this is hugely important. Obviously, complemented by a high degree of OKRs. Jump on. Excuse me. And again, echoing that. So we are. Rob, I think, will touch on a bit of there's regular questions around governance and what do we do and how do we achieve this. So obviously, from an organizational perspective, we vertically, in terms of structure and value streams, we have executive sponsorship of each of these value streams that align to our objectives as an organization. So from a strategy portfolio perspective, where new demands come in, what we really want to do is to target an understanding of the business, the impact value using data in order to drive funding decisions, to allocate resources, to understand how it impacts architecture. Really, in this area where IT4IT has helped us is, again, to talk about how we use data in order to make sure that key information is available to decision makers to ensure that investments and funding and capital investment is allocated in the right area. When it comes to existing products, when it comes to allocating new features, safe, underpinned by IT4IT. What we're really working on now, as part of that broader shift from project to product, is to work with our stakeholders on how to really balance, incremental, short-term, one-off asks from stakeholder groups. How do we balance that relative to our overarching strategic roadmap? And then obviously driving that through on how services are provisioned, and then also from a zero-touch operations in terms of, I touched on that a critical differentiator what Vodafone offers is, highly available services, and making sure that we're operating effectively is absolutely huge. And IT4IT really helps us tell that story. And ultimately wrapping things up, getting to a point where we've gone from. So in terms of where we are today, so we've gone from a situation where we have had a large number of teams planning in isolation, and also on occasion developing their own tools and practices and processes. We've worked, and IT4IT has helped us tell a story to simplify and standardize around that. We've gone from sort of these platforms often being maybe second-class citizens to establishing an internal engineering practice where we've insourced a vast amount of work, ramped up from a very small function to quite a large function. For example, we're working to consolidate the number of portals, etc., and we've established our IT4IT data lake. And jumping on to the final slide, so I've done my very best to keep this very, very practical around how we've used IT4IT, and I wanted to finish things up to talk about how did we get started. And I think this very simple slide sums things up quite perfectly. We, instead of starting from scratch and establishing our own reference architecture, we opted to use IT4IT in order to get things going. We took a data-driven approach to assessing where our maturity is across a variety of areas, and then we provided actionable insights. And that, together with our product team, we built a roadmap. That drove a set of short-term improvements, quick wins in order to demonstrate immediate value, but it has also influenced what are probably 4 or 5 major portfolio epics in terms of our program backlog that we are building out now, and will continue to build out. We're about a year into that journey, and we reckon we have about a year or 2 left. What I would say is, and what I really emphasize is, building on that sentiment, I don't want to suggest that we're done. I probably don't want to suggest that we're ever going to be done. Things are evolving and ever evolving so fast. But what we're doing here and what we're doing with IT4IT allows us to constantly go back, reassess where we want it to be, use data to assess on whether we've achieved that, and again to revise and to reprioritize and refocus. So with that, I want to thank everybody. I appreciate your time, and if you have any questions, either here or offline, please feel free to reach out to me.
Thank you, Luke. I realize that trying to cover such a huge body of work in 15-20 minutes is very, very difficult. And but the slides will be available for people, so you will get a chance to dig into those, and obviously the recording too. So we're going to go to Q&A without wasting more time with me speaking. So joining us for QA in the familiar trademark jacket is Rob Agershoek, who is the Senior IT Management Architect at DXC. He's also co-chair of the IT4IT Forum within the Open Group, which is the group that evolves and maintains the standard. In his day job, he helps IT organizations to transform and become a lean and agile service provider, ready to manage the new digital ecosystem consisting of hybrid cloud and multi-vendor sourcing landscape. He's architecting the new IT organization, combining standards, practices, and concepts such as IT4IT, TOGAF, Scaled Agile Framework, DevOps, and continuous delivery, security management with established IT service management methodologies such as ITIL. A lot of the things that you heard Luke talk about. So that's how, obviously, how Rob is involved here. So welcome, Rob.
Thank you, Steve. Nice to be here.
Quick, straight to a question for you, Luke. And it's really around governance, but there's a preamble. I understand that creating a holistic digital operating model across the end-to-end IT value chain is challenging, considering the various stakeholders involved. Can you explain more about how governance was set up and how important is the right governance model?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Look, I think firstly, it's about communication and knowledge sharing. I don't want to necessarily pretend that I do that quite well, but I think large chunks of our organization are aligned around the story, and it's quite self-perpetuating at this stage, so that helps. But as a first port of call, Vodafone, as part of our technology strategy or Tech 2025, we have our tech guidance, and that is a very clearly published set of technology standards that guides investment. So that drives things in the right direction. How we've gone from 22 ITSM systems to 3 is a big part of that, for example. In organizing and structuring around our value streams, we've not quite adopted the IT4IT value streams out of the box. We sort of a hybrid between 2 and 3. Our members, our executive leadership team, are effectively sponsors of those value streams. So everything that's happening from a strategy portfolio planning perspective, our LACE, for example, are the key epic owners, if you will, of that value stream. At the same time, we have our target state. So we've done that maturity assessment. We have quite a robust data baseline of where we are and where we want to be. We, in our product roadmaps, in our sort of conversations with our partners, in the definition of our OKRs, on a regular basis, whether through PIs or broader portfolio planning, we're constantly trying to assess against data, how are we tracking against our objectives, and using sort of leading lagging indicators to see whether we're making the right decisions or not. So it's quite a broad variety of levers that we use, but between those maybe 4 or 5 main instruments, that's how we're maintaining our overall travel direction.
Great. Okay. Yeah. So important. Rob, if I can bring you in, I mean, we've heard, I mean, Vodafone's such a huge organization, a great example of, and Luke's just talked a bit about some of the benefits they've got from how they've used IT4IT. So how you've experienced in helping other organizations, obviously, how can others get started with using this? There's so many things out there. How do we get started with IT4IT?
Yeah, I think the Vodafone case showed how Vodafone has started. I think a very good example. You start with basically looking at your current state, using IT4IT to look what good looks like, assess your current state, co-create with different stakeholders a kind of target state where you want to move to, and then create a sort of transformation plan. And IT4IT really helps you to define, use it as an assessment tool where you are today, use it as a tool to define where I need to go to, and then basically guide you in the transformation. So this is a good way of how to use IT4IT. Yeah.
Right.
And get started.
Yeah. Okay. Lets you gather where you are and gives you a path forward. Yeah. Gathering that stuff.
Yeah, because IT4IT is, as a reference model, really can be used as a kind of assessment. Okay, what do I have in place? What is missing? Relate to data flows, end-to-end value streams, the capabilities, and then help you to basically get a better insight what we have today. And that's the last slide that Luke shows as well. And then use it as a kind of guidance what change and what phase and what step to go to a more integrated digital delivery model. Great.
Okay. One of the things I'll come back to you, Luke, and maybe Rob, you have a comment as well on this. But merging practices, there are different practices and standards that are out there. You mentioned a few, ODA and obviously SAFe and DevOps approaches as well as IT4IT. How did the IT4IT standard help you merge these together, Luke?
Look, I think sometimes it's much about storytelling, right? I don't think anyone, maybe being able to link incidents and problems back to defects, so that ops and DevOps teams can collaborate. I don't think anyone objects to that, right? But I think, if I go into that diagram showing you fragmented estate, it's when you really go deep into that view relative to the number of services that we have. When you're operating in a relatively federated nature with the working practices, trying to do that linkage is quite interesting. I loosely talked about how when we started this, we had 22 ITSM platforms. We're down to 3. We will be down to 1 by the end of the year. But if you have multiple ITSM platforms with multiple team backlog tools, right? It's an integration nightmare. It's a data modeling nightmare. It's a reporting analytics nightmare. Where do you start? that type of emphasizing that type of problem, really using data to talk about that. IT4IT sort of helped us to tell a story, and right, actually, again, we're not advocating something new. We're not advocating something unique to Vodafone here. We're talking about something that the industry, that the major SIs, the major software vendors are advocating they're doing. This is what we need to do, which ultimately the confidence that a predefined framework, if you will, meant that it was far easier to push on what it was effectively became an open door.
Right.
Maybe I can add to
not alone. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe I can add to that. I think organizations now realize they need to see it as an integrated system, a system approach from idea to production, all the feedback loops, and to create a more integrated approach, like thinking about how do you connect all the parts. And in the past, we have like architecture practice with TOGAF, development, ops, security, risk and compliance with different practices, but IT4IT can bring all this practice together in a more integrated system, right? An integrated digital platform that enables the team to deliver better value, safer and sooner, as Luke was also showing in his slides. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And it's getting that flow going that we hear you sometimes sing about.
Yeah, make it flow. Yeah, indeed.
Make it flow. That's great.
I just want to flow, real flow, change the way of working. 'Cause there is too much waste running through IT, too much friction. IT4IT is the answer for your journey. Automate it all, using Agile and DevOps, a common backbone that will keep you running continuously, much faster and better. I just wanna flow, real flow, change the way of working. 'Cause there is too much waste running through IT, too much friction. And we all need flow, real flow, change the way of working. Hope you understand.